to get some of the greatest high-tech geek minds in the room, lock them in, and say, come up with a solution. I've written a novel about the future of the internet in which they do that, and they discover a way of getting ethics into the system. They put in algorithms for truth. And false statements don't get through the internet. Now, I don't know how it's done, but in my novel, that's what they invent about 30 years from now. I don't think we can wait that long. I think that the internet, any internet geniuses out there want to help me with this. Let's make an algorithm for truth, and then the rest of the stuff wouldn't get through. Insults, damage, sort of attacks on people and all that. And that's what Russia's perfected. Because they're run by thugs and gangsters, they delight in destroying people. And because Trump played to their tune, he is a gangster himself, he's borrowed money from them, he's into his neck with Russian funds and compromat, as it's called. So he loves all that. That's why he ruled by Twitter. Because, you can't actually have a conversation on Twitter. You just say your thing and that's it. So he's a great tool which Russia's most dark gangster types used to take over and infiltrate the American system. And it's touch and go. I mean, it didn't succeed. The January 6th riot failed. And it looks like Trump's going to jail. The people in Georgia are finally going to prosecute him for interfering in the election and stuff. I think he will end up in jail. It's touch and go, because if he's not in jail, he's going to try and run for president. And the Russians will fund the whole thing and use the media to spread the meme that Trump's the good guy. So that's the implication is, again, how do we use social media? How can we make it a peaceful, responsible and moral place instead of this sort of hate-filled rant space? I suppose one of the things is to just work on your own personal enlightenment, like the Jains say. Meditate every day, don't do personal violence, don't do hate speech against your friends. We have to perfect our own ethical space before we engage in social media, because whatever we're doing will be amplified.
It's a tough one, though. I think for some people it becomes a space where they get to connect and discover their own ethical ideology, belief.
Sure. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, but
I'm against social media, but I thought I'd just throw a spanner in the works.
No, I mean, I'm for its wise use, like whiskey. It's good in small doses, but you don't want to drink a whole bottle at once. It's going to do you harm.
Time and place.
Sure.
Okay. More questions. Aristotle and aristocracy, do those words share an etymology?
Strangely enough, they do, yes. Aristocracy means rule by the best. Krasian. Aristotle his name is like the best in some way. I can't remember the exact root. It was just a quirk of history that he got that name, I think. It's got an element. I mean, I used to think the British Constitution had the elements of all three Aristotelian. Had a bit of a constitutional monarchy. It had an aristocracy in the House of Lords, and it had a democracy in the Commons. But unfortunately, I watched it, it got subverted, and the aristocracy in the House of Lords was corrupted with money, and we've now got Russian ex-KGB people sitting in the House of Lords. That tells you how corrupt it went with Russian money. And then the monarchy, I think its influence, which should have stood up against Brexit and said, no, this is stupid, I'm not doing this. I think the Queen got a bit she should have stepped down 10 years ago. Charles would have been able to stand up against Brexit but I think the Queen was afraid, and she misinterpreted her constitutional role to have no power at all. I exchanged letters with her, and she wrote back to me through a secretary saying, I can't stop Brexit, I'm not allowed to do anything that goes against the leading party. And I said, no, that's not true, ma'am. You have a constitutional duty to God and to the country to safeguard this country's well-being. And if in an extreme case like this, something's happening which is totally wrong, you can threaten to abdicate. You could go on a hunger strike. You could do a Gandhian walkabout. You could go and meet the poor around your country. You could be a proper monarch and say, I'm not going to let this pass. Anyway, that's what I told her. And then she died. It was too much of an effort.
Killed the Queen.
I think she just thought it's too much of an effort. She got too old. But bless her, I think her heart was in the right place, but she was afraid. She thought that if she stood up, it would be wrong. But I would say that by not standing up, she colluded with the forces of evil. Because I think behind the Tory party and Boris Johnson were definitely evil forces emanating from Putin, who were deliberately taking Britain out of the EU. And anyone with any, a proper degree or education who can join up the dots, like Tim Snyder or me, we can see that. But, the BBC was silent. I've never spoken on the BBC. Is this lecture going to go on the BBC? It should have been 5 years ago. And I still think, I'll just say this to finish, I still believe, I ran meetings in Parliament, when I lived in London. I knew lots of influential people, and I still think there should be a commission of inquiry into Brexit to find out the exact way that Putin bought and who he bought and what was done. There was a man called Aaron Banks who funded the Vote Leave campaign more than any other political campaign in British history. And his money has been traced to an offshore bank account in the Isle of Man, and they say, well, we don't know where it came from. It obviously came from Russia. So there should be a commission of royal inquiry into that, at the highest level. And if it's found it was corrupt, there should be a second referendum. This has huge implications. I don't want to accept this and not just lying down, Anyway, okay, I'm going to finish there.
Finishing completely, no more questions.
Unless you've got a last one.
I've got many more.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can chat about them over supper.
Yeah, maybe.
And then we'll have a little conviviality.
No, supper I got
banquet.
my
Okay.
Africa onslaught.
Switch that off. And anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
I have one question which I think would be useful.
In public, okay. Go
Yes. I think this lecture has sort of we've sort of traced along the periodic table the sort of origins of what sort of schools of thought might be in conflict with one another and acting itself out in this war.
Yes.
Is there any sort of recommendations, any sort of direction that we should maybe begin to look at on the periodic table around what might be beneficial toward actually healing this war, healing this conflict? I think there was a time that you called Stalin an adolescent, childish, crazy man at some point. And my question is, well, what's the intellectual medicine for that?
Right. What's the solution? Okay, that's a good question to end on. I think what we need is a much more tolerant and a universalist outlook. And that comes from looking at all the traditions of the planet. I run an Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. I don't advocate any one philosophy, Shintoism, Jainism, Buddhism, Christianity, whatever. I'm saying learn about them all. I think the periodic table, if it was in every Russian school, every Ukrainian school, every French, every German and British school, and there were lessons, 2 or 3 times a week on it, and the kids were allowed to learn it all in depth, and they would qualify with a subject called philosophy at the end of their school education. they wouldn't be fighting in wars like this. They would refuse to be cannon fodder for some new crazy guy that comes along in 10 or 20 years. Because education is the inoculation against violence and ignorance. As Kant said, he said, dare to be wise, sapere aude. That's the slogan of the Enlightenment. I'm an Enlightenment teacher wanting this periodic table. The reason I created it, based on the ideas of a Russian, Mendeleev, who did the same with the periodic table of the elements. I'm saying if the world knew how rich and complex our philosophical traditions are, we would be in awe and wonder rather than anger and hatred, you know. And we wouldn't feel poor, I mean, because we have all this bounty. This is the fruit of 10,000 years of studies of mankind. We should be having a good time on this planet now because we've done so much. We should be studying and reading each other's traditions. And I'd like our schools and universities to make this available, that breadth of thinking, you know. And when I went to the University of Moscow, I met people who were on that level. They totally understood this kind of thing. And in Ukraine and every country I've taught in. What saddens me is we've got the ignorant thugs have taken over power. And they're silencing the intellectuals yet again, you know. So I think the medicine is to study the table itself in all its implications. Get a copy. You know, if you're a student listening to this or a professor, order a copy. It's available, it's published. Put it on the wall of your philosophy classroom and make the teachers teach you about it. You know, the only answer is education in the long run and the short term. Anyway, there's my answer. Thank you.
Thanks for that.